actions in our Vuex store. The main use case of actions is that they give us a way to work with our Vuex store asynchronously. In the video titled Mutating State, we saw how we can use mutations when we need to modify state. Mutations, however, are always synchronous, so when we do need to perform some asynchronous operation that should also have an effect on our state, then actions are the way to go. For instance, if we need to make a network call for some resource and then update our state based on the response, this is the kind of thing that's pretty common in web apps and also the kind of things that actions are perfectly suited for. In fact, that's the use case we're going to get into in this video, namely refactoring our food app to make a server call for its list of foods and then updating its own state based on the response. We've already installed Axios into this application to help us make our network calls, so the next step at this point is to jump into our Vuex store located in store index.js, where on line 3 here you'll see we've imported Axios for use. The next step now is to think about setting up an action. We define actions for our store in the actions property, so I'm going to get some space here on line 25 and set up the actions property, starting it off as an empty object. All of our actions are going to go into this object, and actions themselves are functions that receive a context object as an argument, where that context exposes to the method body a few properties related to state, some of which we're going to see leveraged very soon. Now, for the purposes of our demo and this application, what we want to do is create an action that can be used to get a list of foods from our server. On line 26, I'm going to paste in such an action, and you'll note we're going to call it getFoods, and as we just touched on, it's going to receive that context object. Expanding out getFoods now, in its implementation, we're going to be using Axios to perform a get request by saying here axios.get, where the get method takes as an argument the URL that we want to get from. In our case, we have a local server running on port 2222 that has an API we can call to get back an array of food items. Since Axios is promise-based, the result of this call is going to be a promise that we can then wait for with the then function. When our server does return, Axios is going to return to us a response object, and that response object is going to have a property data that contains the actual payload. As we mentioned a bit earlier, we do expect that this payload is going to be an array of food items, so we know we want to then take that array and add it to our app's state. The way to do that, to modify a state, is to use a mutation, and the way to call a mutation from an action is via the context object, which comes with a commit function we can use. All of this is what we're getting done on line 28, so when we say context.commit here, we're calling a mutation named addFoods, and we're passing to it our response payload. If for some reason our network request